Do you ever feel like a loser when you're sitting alone in your house, watching TV while eating leftovers from the night before in your reclining chair? I probably shouldn't feel like that. I'm sure everyone has been in the exact same situation when there are no parties to go to or your families are out of town. Maybe loser isn't the right term, but I think alone is. It's in those moments that I feel the most alone. Honestly, I feel like that a lot. My life isn't bad per se. I have a decent house, no debt. I never worry about getting food on the table. I have a pretty normal schedule, I guess. I get up, I eat breakfast, I drive to work, I think about swerving into oncoming traffic, I do the work at my boring stocking job, I come home, I eat dinner alone in my chair in the living room. Standard stuff. Everyone does it. I have a cat, although I don't know if I really want one. He doesn't have a name. I guess I just never got around to giving him one. He is lying in the chair next to me, sleeping, making soft noises. The only light in the room is the soft blue glow of the television as I passively sit in my reclining chair and watch the news. They are talking about how the global number of disappearances in the world has sharply increased recently, causing worry and confusion. They talk about how in a city far away from here, an entire block has been evacuated and cornered off from civilians, with the government only giving vague answers about dangerous gases in response to the reporters' questions. There are a bunch of homeless looking people in the background of the report, seemingly arguing about trying to get back into the closed off section. They look pretty upset, I think to myself absentmindedly. Then the TV cuts to a commercial about cars and I stop thinking about it. I really try not to think about anything that isn't right in front of me these days. I take a bite of my food. What am I even eating? I don't remember. I look down at my plate. Spaghetti. No sauce, no cheese. I'm not even really enjoying it. I think that sauce would probably be an improvement, but for the life of me, I can't muster up the energy to go get it. It's so much easier to just leave it as it is. So, I take another bite of my plain pasta, glancing over at the cat next to me. Still sleeping. The cat is another thing that is vaguely uncomfortable, like the pasta, but I can't bring myself to get rid of it. Or maybe I just don't have the energy to. It's complicated. It's not a bad cat. We get along fine, actually. Sometimes he sits in my lap and I pet him, and he purrs. That's pretty nice. Probably the nicest part of my day. I feed him and water him, and once he caught a mouse. So pulling his weight, I suppose. Still, I think it would be easier if he wasn't around. He kind of gets in the way, if you're catching my drift. Not physically, but emotionally. But I can't stand the thought of leaving him all alone, with no one to take care of him. He deserves better than that. I hear our clattering from downstairs, in the basement. I look over at the cat, who has just been startled awake, and is now looking at me with wide eyes. He is just as confused as I am. I wait a moment, but there are no more noises, so I start watching the TV again, and he starts to slowly settle down as well. Something probably just fell off one of the overcrowded shelves that I have down there. I can pick it up later. Or maybe I won't. I don't go down into the basement too often. It's a lot of work climbing up and down the stairs when it really isn't necessary. It's the same reason I don't really talk to anyone at my job. I just don't have the energy to put in the effort. I just stock shelves and then go home. Once, my boss called me into his office. He told me that he thought that maybe it would be good for my mood if I chit-chatted with some of our coworkers, got to know them a little better. I stared at this man, with his off-white shirt and name tag, in his tiny office at the back of the store, as the fluorescent lights buzzed above us. I told him sure, yeah, I would do that. And he seemed satisfied with that response. So I went back out and proceeded to talk to no one. And I thought to myself, I'm too old for this kind of crap. But really, I'm on the younger end of middle age. I know that there are people out there that are my age and they have a social life, friends and family that they see on the weekends. I just can't seem to have the time or energy to do that sort of stuff. There's another clatter from the basement, and I let out a deep sigh. God damn it. I guess this is something I have to deal with after all. I slowly get up out of the chair, putting my plate of spaghetti on the side table. It's going to be cold by the time I get back from my little adventure, but I can just warm it up again. Maybe I'll even get some sauce to put on it this time. As I get up, the cat hops down off his chair to follow me. Whatever, he can do what he wants. I walk down the dimly lit hallway, with only the soft glow of the TV behind me to illuminate the way. Pictures line the walls, and I do my best to avoid looking at them. I really have got to take those down too. But not only do I not have the energy for that either, this time it's actively painful to think about. The doctor said I was suffering from depression, but I'm pretty sure you're supposed to cry a lot if you're depressed, and I haven't cried once. I still remember that day as if it was yesterday. We just have to take him away for a moment, they had said. I'd only been able to hold him for a moment. Just a moment. I never saw him again. They say he died during the checkup. He'd had an allergic reaction to the needle they used to draw his blood. I never even got to bury him. That can't be standard procedure, right? I don't know. I don't really remember much else about that day. The next thing I remember was waking up at home, in a cold sweat and crying while screaming. I had no one to talk to about it, even. It had been an artificial insemination, so I didn't have a partner to help me through it, and my parents had died just a few weeks prior, in a car crash. Those were the pictures that looked down at me, even now as I walked through the hallways, smiling empty smiles. Man, that had been a rough couple of weeks. I let out a rough bark of a laugh at that thought, startling the cat. Yeah, that's one way to think about it. You know, a rough patch. A bit of a snag. A real downer for a bit. I finally reached the basement door after what felt like an eternity of walking. A plain white door that said nothing about what laid behind it. Another thump from below, louder than the previous. Though if this was because it was getting more intense or because I was closer, I wasn't sure. I gripped the cold metal of the doorknob and turned it, pushing open the portal to reveal a dark descent down. What little light from the TV that made it this far did nothing to penetrate the gloom. It was so black I couldn't even see the first step. There was a heaviness in the air, one I didn't know how to explain even if I tried. My life had changed a lot in these past few months, not for the better, and I could feel that if I reached over to turn on the light and see what was down there, it was about to change a whole lot more. It was just one of those things you knew when you were standing on the edge of something that hadn't happened yet, but you could feel the anticipation in the air, as if the universe had drawn in a breath and was holding it, waiting to see what you would do next. It was electric, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited. Just the barest spark, but it was there. I hadn't felt like that in what seemed to be forever. I used to live for it, the thrill of the hunt, the joy of solving a particularly difficult problem or making it through a dangerous situation. But did I really want to take this risk? Did I want to see what laid behind door number 1? A not-so-little voice in the back of my head said no, it wasn't worth it. I could just not do this. I could turn back and keep things the way they were. Was I happy? No, not really. I wasn't even comfortable, in all honesty. But at least what I had now I knew. At least if I stayed where I was, it couldn't get any worse. Could I really afford to lose any more? I looked around at my house. I looked down at the cat that was now beneath me. If I were to lose these too, and I felt deep in my heart that was a very real possibility, I don't think I would be able to keep going, as it were. I was having enough trouble as it was, without tempting fate. But on the other hand, I did want change. I didn't want things to remain like this forever, even if the future was scary and I had no idea what it held. And yes, that included what was at the bottom of these stairs. But I just couldn't handle the idea of losing even more. It was just too much to bear, and I knew that I just wasn't strong enough. I began to push the door closed, deciding then and there that whatever it was, I just couldn't deal with it. If it was a robber or wild animal, then they could have whatever they wanted from the basement, and hopefully they wouldn't come up here. I just didn't have the energy to deal with that, with all of this. It was all just too much. Just then, there was a flash beneath my legs, a quick movement, and suddenly the cat had darted through the almost closed door. The last thing I caught was a flick of his tail as he disappeared into the darkness. God damn it. God damn it. What do I do now? This was not the plan. Do I just leave him down there, to his own devices, and let whatever happens happen? But I couldn't do that. I had just said I didn't have the strength to lose another, not like this. I know that I was just seconds ago willing to let whatever was down there run rampant in my house, but that was different. There was a separation there, a door between us and them. I know that doesn't really make sense, but that was how it felt. A distance that felt impossible to cross, at least in my head. But the cat had run in without a second thought, and now he was involved. So that meant I had to get involved too, whether I wanted to or not. So I flipped the switch for the stairs lights and embraced whatever came next. Thankfully, there wasn't a man with a gun at the bottom of the descent, looking up and ready to shoot me. I figured there wouldn't be. A burglar wouldn't make this much noise. I gave it a solid chance it was some sort of wild animal that had somehow found its way in and was panicked on how to get out. The cold concrete of the stairs felt harsh against my feet, but down I went anyway, with no sign of the cat in sight. The stairs were positioned in such a way that I could only see a small bit of the basement itself, and with the light off at the bottom, there was not much to see at all, just a thin strip of light illuminating an empty concrete floor. I finally reached the bottom, flipping the switch and at last getting a good look at the basement. Several shelves of stuff that had varying degrees of usefulness had indeed been tipped over and spilled. The resulting mess was everywhere, making it difficult to walk without hurting myself by stepping on something with my bare feet, but I did my best. Looking around for the cat, I quickly spotted him in the corner hissing at something. I'm not really sure what it was, to be completely honest. It was coming down from the small window in the top corner of the room, the only other entrance to the basement besides the stairs. It was difficult to see, cast in shadows that it was, but its appearance was long and thin, sort of shaped like a garden hose, and it was thrashing around, hanging from the window. Even as I watched, it smacked into another shelf, knocking it over and sending random debris everywhere. It must have quite a bit of strength in that small frame. "Hey," I said softly. "Hey, stop that." I'm not really sure why I did that. It's not like I was expecting it to listen, but I felt like I had to do something. It was all I could think of in that moment. The thing didn't listen anyway. It just kept jerking around in a way reminiscent of a small snake under someone's shoe. The cat hissed at it again, his back arched high and tail up in the air. I felt so very tired all of a sudden. I didn't ask for any of this, whatever this was. Why can't I just slowly rot away in my house by myself? This was all far too much. I had no idea what to do in this position, but I knew I couldn't just leave it be, and I hated that. Because now I couldn't let this go. I had seen it and heard it, and now it was a part of my life, and it wasn't something that I was able to ignore anymore. Even if this thing were to pull back out the window and never return, I would be thinking about it every day for the rest of my life, wondering what it was and where it came from. That was just who I am. I wonder if there is anyone out there that could just let something like that go. Maybe. But it was a bad habit of mine. Left over from my working days, I suppose. At my real job. Should I shoot it? I had a gun upstairs. A Glock 22 left over from when I was still working my real job, but that seemed like overkill. It would be extremely loud for one thing, and it would probably alert the neighbors, who would then call the police. I didn't really want to see anyone on the police force. There might be someone I recognized, and then I would have to talk with them and catch up, and I really didn't want to do that. I felt somewhere deep down that maybe my feelings regarding old faces was not the most important thing right now, but that was a distant thought, and I ignored it. Besides, maybe this was some super important scientific discovery, some undiscovered species that would revolutionize the way we saw all life as we knew it. Granted, said wonder of science was currently destroying my basement, but still. Also, I was never super into biology or anything like that, so I don't know, maybe this was a weird tree root or something and actually wasn't anything special. I mean, I know it's not a tree root, probably, but you get the point. Maybe I could call... No, not him. I can do things without him. I've solved cases before without him, and I could handle this one on my own, as I have many before. I didn't want to see anyone, but definitely not him. Too many memories. God damn it, I thought to myself, suddenly angry at everything. I grabbed an old rake, intent on smacking this thing until it went away and I didn't have to think about it anymore. But before I could do anything, the limb-like thing brushed against the cat, causing him to jump backwards, but far too slowly. Faster than I could follow, it grabbed the animal, pulling it up and out of the window before I had any sort of time to react as the cat screeched in fright. Well, that's not good. That's the second time tonight that my inaction has caused things to happen out of my control. It was unacceptable. My life wasting away was one thing, but the cat did not deserve to suffer because of my indecisiveness. So no more thinking, now was the time for action. I rushed back up the stairs, tripping over some of the junk that still laid scattered about, but didn't rush outside, not yet. Instead, I ran to my room, pulling open the cabinet that was built into the bedside drawer. There laid my Glock 22, still as clean as the day I retired. I made sure it was well maintained. It was really the only extracurricular activity that I did anymore. I wasn't planning on using it for that. It's just important to make sure that your equipment is always in good shape. You don't want to find out it's jammed when you really need it not to be. I quickly pulled out the mag, giving a quick once-over of the weapon. Unloaded, of course, I knew that, but you still want to treat all weapons as if they were armed at all times. I grabbed the box of .40 calibers that laid just next to the gun and loaded it deftly and efficiently. 15 rounds. Hopefully, I wouldn't have to fire any of them, but I had no idea what I was dealing with here. Whatever it was that had been in my basement, it was like nothing I had seen before, and I wanted to be prepared for any eventuality. As I did one final check, I realized that my head felt strangely light. Everything had this sort of dreamlike state to it, as though I was swimming through water as I moved out of my bedroom and towards the back door. It all felt so unreal. My pulse was pounding and I felt like I was shaking with adrenaline, but I looked down at my hands and they were perfectly steady. I realized that I didn't really care what happened to me. I think that was what this weird disconnect between my brain and body was. My life was already such a mess, so beyond salvaging, that it didn't really matter whether I made it back or not. Nobody would really miss me if I was gone. There wasn't anyone who would probably even notice. Except the cat. That was really what I was fighting for. Him. And what he represented to me. A better life, one I used to have so very long ago. Or at least that was how it felt. I almost didn't even care about how unusual this situation actually was. My cat being kidnapped by an unknown entity through my basement window. It was what it was, and that was all there was to it. I slid open the back door, peering out into the darkness behind my house. The light from my outdoor lamp shone brightly, but died quickly when it reached the tree line. The forest beyond looked like it stretched on for infinity. No end in sight. I hesitated for a second, then went back to the kitchen and grabbed my flashlight and threw on a jacket and shoes. No point in wandering around the woods in the cold and darkness like a moron. I stepped out onto the lawn, barely noticing the slightly damp grass beneath my feet. I glanced around, before going over to check the window from which the thing had retreated. I had the gun out, finger perpendicular to the trigger but not on it, other hand holding the flashlight up as I looked. There was the window, and it was only just now that I realized that it had shattered inwards, probably from the initial break-in. I hadn't even realized it when I was in the basement earlier. The glass was mixed in with all the other garbage on the ground, and I had been too distracted to pay too much attention to the window itself. I had been taken off guard then, but I felt calm now, probably too calm for what the situation called for. I was back in my element, doing something I had done a million times before, and it was, in a way, comforting. I felt an absurd urge to turn to my partner and ask him what he thought, if he was thinking it was just a standard break-in, but I shook it off. I was alone. This was my house, and it certainly was not a standard break-in. It was time to get to work. I checked the window, noting the way the glass had shuttered inwards. I already knew that, obviously, but one step at a time. You didn't want to rush or you might miss something. Of course, I was on a time limit. I had no idea what was happening to the poor cat, but still. I was already working with very small amounts of information. I had to gather as much as I could. I felt like I was thinking clearly for the first time in years, as though a fog had been cleared. There was still the dreamlike quality to it all, but it was almost helping me, making it all easier. Maybe it was the sheer insanity of it all. It was all so unreal that I was able to, at least for now, push my negative memories out of my head and focus only on the here and now. It was almost like I was letting muscle memory take over. There, on the ground, a long trail on the wet earth, as though a heavy snake had dragged itself through my yard. And surrounding the trail was torn up grass, as though something had been desperately trying to cling to anything it could. The cat, of course, being dragged away kicking and screaming, both metaphorically and literally. I followed the trail with my flashlight, where it led into the woods only about 50 feet behind my house. Great. That was not a small forest either. It stretched on for a long, long time. It seemed like every year there would be a new missing persons case, and every year they would find the body in these woods, picked over by scavengers and nothing but bones left behind. The trees loomed over me, inviting danger behind every corner, just begging for me to get lost in their shadows. I peered up, over the tree line. It was a new moon, so it was an especially dark night, but it seemed like there were a million stars shining down, twinkling with their far-off light. One in particular shone directly over the trees, brighter than the rest. It seemed to glimmer, as though it was trying to say something to me, though what that was I had no idea. Was that the North Star? Perhaps. Astronomy was never my strong suit. Besides, I wasn't out here to stargaze. I had a mission. So, with a drawn-in breath, I headed into the deep dark woods, with only a flashlight, my own wits, and the cold glint of starlight to guide me. Look around. Check everything. Miss nothing. A broken branch, the sign of a struggle. The hoot of an owl, far away. Gashes in a tree, low, near its base. They were freshly made, a drop of sap even oozing out of one of them. The wind rustled through the leaves, bringing with it a cold chill, but also something else. A strange smell. One that seemed out of place in this dark and foreboding forest. A hint of chocolate, of all things. That didn't seem right. I was much too deep in the woods to be catching the whiff of something like that through an open window. But before I had time to really think about it, my flashlight flickered, and I had to smack it to keep it lit. Damn it, I hadn't checked the batteries, and they were clearly in need of change. Amateur. What a stupid mistake. Clearly my game was not nearly as much in the game as I thought it was. I considered going back, getting fresh batteries, but decided against it. I know I said to take your time and do it right, but twice now I had been too slow and gotten taken by surprise. I didn't want to get jumped again. Besides, it seemed like the flashlight, while dim, had stopped flashing. So I pressed on, following the subtle trail left by whatever that thing was. I wish I knew what I was getting into, but I also strangely didn't really care. It was what it was, and if something happened to me, then it happened. It seemed I couldn't shake that thought, ominous though it was. That being said, I still wasn't even sure what I was looking for, leading me to be constantly sweeping my frustratingly dim flashlight around constantly in an attempt to prevent anything from sneaking up on me. This, combined with the fact that I was also attempting to keep track of a trail that was made up of little more than broken twigs and trampled plants in the middle of the night, led me to not notice what was happening until it was overpowering. The scent, The smell, what had just been a hint earlier, was everywhere now. It was divine. Like cookies and cupcakes and warm summer days. It was like pine trees and flowers and bacon sizzling in the frying pan. I could think of nothing more out of place for a dark forest than what I was smelling. It was so jarring that it was almost comical, but I didn't even care. I closed my eyes, meaning to just for a second, but it was so intoxicating that I could barely resist indulging. As I did, a powerful image filled my mind. It was me, in the kitchen with my mother, and we were laughing about something. She was baking something delicious, perhaps a pie or cake, and I was helping her, having a wonderful time. My son, my beautiful baby boy, was in the living room, playing with his grandfather, but when he saw that the treat had been pulled out of the oven, he came running over. He was desperate for some, as all children are, and he looked at me with big round eyes, the color of which looked like melted chocolate. He smiled at me, trying to sweet talk his way into getting a slice early, but I shook my finger no at him, giggling. "No eating before dinner," I heard myself say, and it sounded so close, but so far away. My father chuckled, saying I should give the poor boy a slice. A growing man needs his food. And he nodded vigorously, agreeing with what he said, not that he necessarily believed it. I tousled his hair, looking out the window at the sun-soaked yard. I felt something tug on my leg, and I looked down, expecting to see the cat rubbing up against me. But there was no cat. The sensation was warm and sticky, almost to the point of being wet, but nothing was there. My perfect son, the one I never had, tugged on my shirt again. He wanted the pie. Or was it cake? I couldn't remember. I looked out the window again, but the sun was gone. It was a cold night, with a chilly wind. A single star twinkled down at me, the only one able to break through the trees, seemingly trying to warn me. Of what, I wonder? Another tug at my ankle, this time harder, so hard that I almost fell over. But this place was so nice, and the smell of pie, or cake, was so pleasant. I looked out again, at the star, and I told it I didn't want to leave, that it would be so nice to stay here where I was warm and happy. The star said nothing, because stars can't talk, but I knew what it was saying anyway. "What about the cat?" the star said. "What about him?" And I knew it was right. I had come out here on a mission, and I couldn't very well stop now. "Goodbye, my son," I said, and before he had time to say anything back, I opened my eyes.